Awesome. So thank you all for joining us for our second virtual town hall. Really appreciate you taking your lunch break. If anyone actually gets a lunch break at this point, I think every moment is kind of up in flux for most people. But for joining us for this, if you were on the call last week, we appreciate you coming back. If this is your first time, thank you again. So I'll give you a little bit of a rundown of why we're doing this and how it's going to work. So 3 things that we're trying to do with this platform, and I mentioned these last week, is to inform. We want to share with you what we know in our ongoing conversations with government and other groups in the area. We want to include, so we want to give you a place to feel like you're connected to each other and have a voice. And we want to inspire you. So we want you to keep in mind that there's going to be an after in this whole crisis, and we want to encourage you to be thinking about exciting things and inspiring things to take you to the future, not just the present. So in this session, we're going to hear an update from Brian Johnson, president of MassMEDIC. Tina Morrison is going to give us an update on some really cool things the FDA is working on right now. I won't jump too much into it. I'll let her fill us all in. And Jennifer Geetter from McDermott, and Emery is going to talk us through some of the recent changes, right? So we know there's a lot of things going on with telemedicine and telehealth, and some restrictions are being relaxed. Some other things are being approved. So she's going to give us a little update on how you can see the world from that perspective. We are going to try polls again this week. Last week it didn't work, but I think that would be a great time to jump into our first poll and see if we've made enough updates to Zoom and yelled at enough Zoom people. Just kidding, we don't yell at Zoom people. They're very nice people. To see if it'll work this time. So I am gonna hit the poll button and I'm gonna launch it. And anybody seeing this poll on their screen?
Yes, I see it.
Okay, if you all will go ahead and fill out the poll, we'll see if this will actually work this time and give me some updates. Brian, did you vote already?
Yeah.
Okay. It's still saying that there 0% of people have voted, so I'm thinking they're still having the glitch that they were having last week.
I voted.
Okay. Yeah, I voted too. Okay, so then I'm going to ask you all, since this one is not an anonymous poll, if you can pick one of these topics, if whatever you voted for, maybe jump them into the chat bot for me, because I really would love to get your feedback on the kinds of topics either that we have listed or that are additionally top of mind for you all. So we can start bringing in speakers to address these kinds of things and get discussions going. So that may be the best option. If the poll's not working, take a look, add to the chat bot. That'd be great. Awesome. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and end the poll since it's still not working. Okay, great. Thank you for going on the fly. And again, I forgot to introduce myself, but I am Rachel Robinson, in case you don't know me, Vice President of MassMEDIC. And at this point, I am going to turn things over to Brian Johnson to give an update on where we stand.
Great. And Rachel, I think everybody can mute themselves, right?
Correct. Yeah, just
Okay.
a little housekeeping. Please keep yourself muted unless there's something specific that you want to talk about. Questions will be best through the chat bot, so that way we don't jump in and interrupt everybody else. So if you have a general question as we're going through, put them in the chat and we'll make sure we get to Q&A at the end of each session.
Great. Thank you, Rachel. Thank you, everybody, again, for joining us. I think this is day 13 or 14 for most of us in a giant social experiment called living at home with our families in close quarters with no set structure for education or living. It's a very interesting time I've gone through. I'm not afraid to admit I've gone through every emotion that is possible. But I wanted to update you on a few things that I think are pretty critical right now. First is from the state, and I wanted to give you guys a chance if you had questions about the Massachusetts stay-at-home advisory. This advisory, it's not a state shelter-in-place order. It is an advisory telling non-essential workers to stay home. It is enforced locally through municipalities with escalating fines. The spirit of the advisory is not to include medical device manufacturers and their supply chain partners. The intent of the governor and the governing bodies of the state has been to continue our work as essential, and it does not necessarily need to be direct COVID response. So if you are engaged in the production of healthcare, if you're engaged in the creation of MedTech, if you're engaged in the supply chain of MedTech, you can consider yourself exempt from the order. This has been communicated through many different folks, but we have it on the highest authority that we can continue to operate safely, to continue operating our businesses. That means, all the standard things we talked about: social distancing, making sure you put in the appropriate safety measures in your factories. But I think we did all of us in the MedTech community, biotech community, pharma community kind of came together on this. We gave national advisories. We've created a framework by which local governments are using. So I think that's a very strong positive for our industry right now. And I think it also should let you know that despite how difficult the circumstances are, your work that you do is still essential, and that we still need to have a healthcare system, even if elective procedures are not being performed right now. We still need to innovate, and we still need to think about how we come out of this as a healthcare industry. The state response has also evolved. And I wanted to kind of take a second here to talk to you guys about this, because we've been fielding a ton of calls. The state right now is actively procuring PPE, ventilators, and other equipment. When I say PPE, I'm talking about surgical masks, N95 masks, face shields, scrubs, bunny suits, booties, rubber gloves, and then all the way up to, of course, ventilators. As you might imagine, in the same way that the world went out and bought every piece of roll of toilet paper there is, every company that's in this space has experienced a tremendous surge on demand. That demand has overwhelmed the supply chain, and we basically it's going to need to be ironed out over the next 6 weeks. Hopefully the supply chain can recover. I see folks on this call I've had a lot of conversations with about this. That being said, if you currently produce any of these products, you can sell them directly to the state, and we can help you pipeline to the procurement office at the command response. Like all things with a state, these are not seasoned healthcare buyers. This is not normal times. Hospitals are typically the buyers for this equipment. And I think the glut of municipalities, states, and countries all fighting to get in line to buy products is also creating some confusion. AdvaMed has called for FEMA to take over procurement of ventilators. We will see how that plays out. But it is an evolving situation. So, I'm not sure that I advise right now that if you're in a different adjacent business, that you pin too much hopes on spinning up a production line to produce PPE. I think if you have it, if you currently produce it, you can probably sell it to the states. If you're looking to pivot hard, I would seek some information before that. There's clearly a shortage because of demand has surged dramatically, but I think we just have to understand that there are many players right now, trying to buy and not enough stock. So that being said, the state has also stood up an emergency response team for manufacturing. This is run through the MassTech Collaborative, through Carolyn Kirk's team, Ira Moskowitz's team. They've employed folks from MIT, from the hospital systems, and they're looking for ways in which they can help stand up a manufacturing response to the current crisis. If you are interested in becoming a part of this, when we post the town hall on LinkedIn, I will put a link that you can fill out to have them contact you if you're a manufacturer and you would like to pivot and help create this stock at this time. That will be the best course of action for you, and that's the one I can recommend because they have direct attention from the state. So the overhanging issue in all this is understanding of demand. We currently have models for how the coronavirus will impact our hospital system. We currently are starting to see the uptick in our hospital systems, but current demand does not match the model. So we're still in a time of great uncertainty in terms of what hospital has what hospital needs what, and how we can fulfill that. The state's response has been good. It's been evolving. There's so many moving parts that the stories change every day, but we are on top of it. Third, if you currently have PPE supply that you're not using that you want to donate, that would go through our supply chain hub with MassBio and the Mass Hospital Association and the Coalition for Teaching Hospitals. To date, we've had response from more than 400 companies looking to donate supplies to the effort, which is phenomenal. Many of the companies in our membership have done this as well, but I mean, we're talking about, the other day I looked on there and we even saw tattoo parlors and a lot of really wild companies that are looking to donate. So the best thing to do is to sign up and fill out the survey link. And again, I will put those in the chat bot here, and then we'll put those afterwards on LinkedIn so that you can see. We try to post everything on LinkedIn through the MassMEDIC page, but we will go ahead and so that's probably the best place to get important information for that. I posted in the chat bot. Yes, we have. They are reaching out to veterinary clinics at this point, so we've done a good job of getting out the word. But again, what we've realized is that existing stock of PPE that is currently in the state is probably our best route to solve an immediate problem. Last week we talked about MDR and CDRH. If you look in the chat bot, I posted the letter to industry from CDRH. This talks about how the FDA is responding right now to current submissions and things like that. I'm just going to leave it to you guys to read that. I will put the link in up as well. MDR, we heard about that last week, that it would take an act of God to move MDR. Well, we're seeing some movement to try and push off MDR implementation, which I think could be a net positive for the industry as well. And then finally, I just wanted to share an interesting story with you guys. So yesterday 2 days ago, there was a big story on BU's infectious lab in the south end of Boston. It's called The Needle. And The Needle was highly controversial when it opened up because of its handling of class 4 contagions like Ebola and things like that. And there was a lot of nervousness on part of the neighbors to open that lab. Well, now that lab actually, according to the Boston Globe, is the centerpiece right now. They have the COVID virus, and they're actually testing several treatments up against it. And they're one of our best hopes in this fight. And they're one of the only labs in the state that has this the live virus. And yesterday I got an email from BU, and it was thanking MassMEDIC for the work my predecessor did many years ago to testify on behalf of the critical importance of the needle. And Tom Summer went and he testified in front of the Boston City Council, and we wrote letters in support. And we got a note thanking us from BU saying that, you know, without that support, you know, the work that's getting done now couldn't have happened. So to me, this whole process has been an incredible reminder of just the importance of this industry council, the importance of our industry, and the importance of all the work you guys do. And don't think for a second that anything you've done will not have an impact. Everything we do now will have an impact. The technologies that you guys create, the work that we do supporting you with advocacy, the work our regulators do, the work our startups do is critically important. And just because right now we're facing, you know, this specific threat doesn't mean that on the other end, everything we do today won't have an impact, because it will. And I just want to continue to stress that. So thank you all for your support, and thanks for what you guys do. And it's just been an incredible honor to work with everybody.
Thanks, Bri. So I did want to add one thing on the critical designation for companies. We did get a couple of questions about whether med device employees need to be carrying some kind of documentation, or if they need to show some kind of proof as they're going about their daily lives that they're supposed to be there. The confirmation is no, they do not have to carry anything. Some med device companies have written up a template for them to have on their person anyway, but we did receive confirmation from the Lieutenant Governor's office that they should not need anything. They shouldn't be stopped necessarily, but if they are, there isn't any documentation that's required to show that they are a critical employee at a med device company. So that's just something I wanted to make sure to share with everyone. Yes, so just Evan wanted to comment. So one of the questions came in, you know, does this apply to companies even if they are doing med device and supplies outside of COVID-19? And Brian, the understanding, yes, is that all med device companies in manufacturing and supply chain, no matter whether they are COVID-19 response companies, are included as critical, correct?
That's correct. In essence, Secretary Keneally said, if you believe you're exempt, you're exempt. I mean, okay. The intention of the order is to keep and again, it's an advisory, it's not a shelter in place.
Yeah.
Totally different. The intent is to make sure that we continue to operate functions for healthcare, because we all know that it is not just going to be COVID-19 cases that come into the hospital. They're still going to need tons of other technologies for accidents, for heart attack, for stroke, emergency situations. So the state is not trying to, I don't think they wanted to get into a situation where they had to parse everything. So there's, you know, you can just probably think of it as there's a critical manufacturing paragraph in there that pretty much covers everything. But we know for a fact that the spirit of the advisory is to keep all healthcare systems and all healthcare suppliers and creators going. Again, you have to use your common sense, but you know, you don't have to be directly involved in the COVID-19 response.
Awesome. Great. So I think this is an awesome time to pivot to Tina Morrison. So want to thank both of our speakers, Tina and Jennifer, for joining us today. But Tina, we'll put you on the spot first. We asked Tina to speak as, you know, kind of an innovation update, right? So the FDA is working with some of our member companies to do some really cool stuff. And we thought that this would be a great opportunity to share some of the work that's being done outside of the COVID-19 response. So Tina, I will let you take it away.
Great. Thank you so much, Rachel and Brian, for the invitation. I did say during our sort of pre-meeting sound check that in light of all the situation that's going on, our group in the Office of Science and Engineering Laboratories is doing quite a lot of research with computational modeling and the situation at hand. And I would seek to get permission to talk about some of that ongoing work and maybe do a virtual presentation to you all in a couple weeks. So if the topic today sounds interesting and those topics are of interest to you, happy to do that as well. Just briefly, I'm going to give you a high-level snapshot of what we're doing around computational modeling in medical devices. These slides are available currently on Figshare if you use that website. These were also slides that a group of us recently gave to more than 100 staffers on Capitol Hill a couple weeks ago, just before the restrictions to meet in place came down upon us. The congressional briefing was focused on simulation in healthcare. And what was really exciting was the fact that not just FDA gave a presentation, some of the medical device companies presented. We had a physician actually from Boston Children's Hospital, David Hoganson. He's a pediatric cardiac surgeon. He gave a presentation on his simulation team that works with him side by side on all of his clinical critical cases for peds and cardiology, and the role of simulation that he uses to make decisions about their treatment. So it was pretty exciting. We had a number of senators and congressmen stop by. So it seems that this topic is gaining some traction on Capitol Hill. And really the goal for us is to think about resources to the FDA to continue advancing the use of simulation, but also to think about some of the topics that came up were reimbursement. That's one of the challenges I know some of the physicians face in using computational tools, also medical device companies. How can these types of computational tools, software as a medical device, be included in the reimbursement conversations? That was really just an initial launch of that discussion, and we continue to want to dialogue with our congressional constituents on that topic. So I look forward to hearing your questions and comments. Again, this is going to be a super high-level overview. I am going to try to keep it brief because I'm more interested in hearing what your good questions are and then have a chance to follow up with you in the future. Rachel, I haven't been interrupted. I'm assuming slides are good and sound is good? All right, good. That's a thumbs up. So 3 quick things I'm hoping to share with you today. How is simulation relevant to the FDA and medical devices? What are some of the regulatory challenges that we're facing? I would say internally to FDA and also to the regulatory bodies at all the medical device companies, and then what might the future hold? So with respect to sources of evidence where we make regulatory decisions, the traditional models of animal bench testing and clinical trials are always at the forefront of our decision making, and what we're doing in the Office of Science and Engineering Laboratories is really trying to push the use of computational modeling to be more than just a scientific tool and a research tool, but really a regulatory tool in supporting decision making. Before Dr. Scott Lieb left the role as Commissioner of the FDA, he was one of our important advocates for modeling and simulation across the FDA. He made a number of blog posts on The Voice, one in particular when the 21st Century Cures Act came out, really highlighting the use of modeling and simulation as a key tool for regulatory science. So I encourage you, those of you who are interested, to take a look at some of those posts. Really quickly, from the standpoint of health technologies or medical devices, there's kind of these 3 general buckets, and we could argue that there are more, but in general, we look at evidence that is of the virtual device itself. This is mainly information that's provided in a marketing application where modeling is used to demonstrate some performance feature or safety aspect of a medical device. We've also seen cases of virtual patients themselves. One of the computational modeling software as a medical device tools that's gained a lot of traction in the clinical community is from a company called HeartFlow, where their software as a medical device tool actually takes computational images from a patient and does a virtual patient simulation of that patient's anatomy, of their coronary arteries. They do fluid dynamic analysis to assess the criticality of lesions for patients who are experiencing chest pain. Those tools are then used to make a diagnosis and to determine whether the patient should have medical therapy or actually receive a medical device. Other areas that we are seeing growing is the interaction of virtual devices with virtual patients, if you will, from the standpoint of MRI safety assessment. This is a use case that's very prominent in medical device submissions from the standpoint that when we want to evaluate whether a device can be safe for an implant for a patient to then go and receive an MRI, those decisions, that MRI safety assessment decisions, are all initially made with computational simulation tools. As I mentioned, from the standpoint of seeing computational modeling in submissions, it's mainly in the form of supporting performance evidence of a device. I also mentioned briefly the electromagnetic simulations that we're seeing. Many of those models were developed by our scientists in the Office of Science and Engineering Laboratory. So if you're not familiar with those, I encourage you to take a look at those references. One area that I think is really impressive from the engineering laboratories was the study called the VICTORY trial. VICTORY stands for Virtual Imaging Clinical Trial Evaluation, from the standpoint that our scientists, our physicists, completely recreated a clinical trial using computational modeling tools for the entire process of a new medical imaging technology called digital breast tomosynthesis. They created an anthropomorphic breast model so they could create thousands of virtual anatomies. They created computational models of the imaging system, of the images themselves, the radiological images, and then the reader studies, or the interpretation of those images, which were to determine whether a lesion was present or not. And what was really profound is that through the course of this virtual clinical study that took about 3 months in comparison to a 4-year actual clinical study with 600 women that were double exposed to x-rays, in addition to the scores of radiologists that were involved in this study, the FDA team was able to recreate the same regulatory decision, and that was that digital breast tomosynthesis is actually just as good, if not better in some cases, than mammography. And that device has been on the market now for about 18 months. And so this study was recently published in JAMA. And one of the things that we're actively working on with the Medical Device Innovation Consortium is how can we reduce clinical trial sizes? So there is an effort underway called the External Evidence Methodology Group, which is developing statistical frameworks to link together different sources of evidence to be able to link with clinical evidence. And one of those sources of evidence is computational modeling. And we're leading an effort to do that, where we're taking computational tools that allow us to simulate patients, such as some of the ones that are presented here. But in particular, we're working with an organization called Dassault Systems. Actually, their main office is located in Waltham, Massachusetts. They've developed a live-in-heart human model, and we are working with them to recreate some aspects of a clinical study using this model to create a virtual population that will then allow us to investigate some aspects of a medical device and be able to augment a real clinical study with virtual patients. And so we are working closely with the MDIC and their their external evidence methodology program to be able to borrow some of those statistical methodologies in cooperation with a number of medical device industry partners and scores of FDA folks, as well as Dassault System folks, to launch an In Silico clinical trial using the heart model. And then the other cool thing that we're doing is to think about how digital transformation is impacting the industry from the standpoint of where is FDA headed in terms of its review practices, and how might we leverage digital transformation to improve and change our business processes from a review standpoint. So if a company were to harness these sophisticated tools of computational modeling, wouldn't it be interesting and creative to think about how we might harness a product lifecycle management platform to share with FDA, or to conduct the review of this submission on a platform instead of creating a static PDF and sending that to the agency. So one aspect of this project that we're doing is to create a review of the future by which we conduct our submission of this clinical study through a product lifecycle management platform. I think my screen is frozen. Just a second. Okay. So what are some of the challenges? Of course, with computational modeling, one of the biggest challenges that we face is, can we trust the computational model? So we are working with standards organization in addition to the excellent scientists and experts that we have in our office to develop standards, practices, and guidances on assessing model credibility. To tackle stakeholder skepticism, we are really working to bring together all of our stakeholders to have a conversation around good simulation practices. We were supposed to be hosting a workshop in April. Of course, that's been postponed. Really touching upon all aspects of the digital health program, using standards and thinking about real-world evidence to really try to advance the use of simulation for medical device ecosystems. And of course, we can't do that without our partners. All right, so getting close to the end, I think I'm just maybe a minute over time. What does the future hold? Many of you maybe are following what's happening in other industries and this concept of a digital twin. This was brought to my attention from the area of civil engineering, where when they're building an important structure like a bridge, for example, that the civil engineering firms will actually create a virtual digital twin of that bridge. They will implant sensors and readers to really study how the bridge is performing over time. They will take that real-time information, update the computational model to then predict when there might be failures, what should be the maintenance schedule. So can we think about how to use all the tools that we have at our fingertips, at our disposal, to be able to create digital twins and truly realize personalized medicine? So this is something that we're actively thinking about at the FDA, and more to come on that topic. So while we have a Q&A, I'll leave up the closing remarks slide, but I hope you walk away with knowing that FDA is very eager to use simulation to advance medical device innovation in this current time. So thank you for your attention.
Awesome. I'd love to open up to anybody who has questions in the chat bot, or if you unmute yourself one at a time, you can do that. I mean, I think just to get things started, my question is, what are the, if you were guessing, what are the odds that you could actually, I don't want to say replace the need for human clinical trials? Obviously, there's going to be a variance of what kinds of products could use this, but as we look toward the issues we're all having right now, where clinical trials are just being stopped, right? That things are not progressing forward. Is this something where in the future we could use this data to, like you said, augment those trials and try to come to the same conclusions?
Yeah, I think what we're trying to do right now is to think about places where we know modeling is very successful and can be more powerful than even the clinical setting. Even just taking the example of the living heart model, we've been having intense discussions about what are some of the things that we can glean from a model that we can't from the clinical setting. Unfortunately, what we need to do as the modeling community is to demonstrate that we can actually recreate some of the important clinical outcomes that physicians typically rely on. And then we need to be able to say, okay, well, here's some additional engineering things that we can spin into clinical outcomes and say, here are some things that you can't look at clinically that we can give you with a computational model. So really being able to combine those two. And then going forward, when we have a lot of confidence in our computational models, we can then slowly step away and say, okay, we don't need clinical evidence in this area. We have a robust model to answer this question. Let's use the clinical setting to answer these other questions that we really want to be able to interrogate now. So I think that it's really about using them in concert with each other, not one to replace the other.
That makes sense. I see any questions. I see Jake. Yeah, it's really interesting. Oh, Holly, that's a good question about, yeah, I think you did mention, Tina, reimbursement being something that's being considered. Any thoughts on that?
So we've just started the dialogue, particularly with Capitol Hill. As I mentioned, we just had this briefing a couple weeks ago. The other thing that is actively ongoing at CDRH is we have a number of staff that have been doing detail rotations with CMS and some of the private private providers to be able to open up the dialogue from a number of standpoints. One, obviously the reimbursement issue, but also how can modeling be used to supplement some of the evidence that's needed to make those reimbursement decisions. But these conversations have only just started, so if there are folks that are interested in helping to accelerate those conversations, it would be great to connect you with those relevant folks in CDRH.
I see Brian's question.
Oh,
Yeah,
the chat
what
box.
can industry do to help accelerate the process?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. I think raising questions to the folks that you interact with at CDRH. We are also trying to raise this topic as part of the MDUFA 5 negotiations. Our office director, Ed Margerison, has created a new program focused on the credibility assessment of computational modeling, trying to change the conversation to not just be about the science of modeling, but coming up with guidance documents, good practices for how industry can start using simulation, not just for their medical device submissions, but for all aspects of the product lifecycle. For example, with the Case for Quality initiative that's underway, I know that those folks are really trying to push the use of simulation for manufacturing and also for the design phase, where you're using simulation more robustly at the front of it and limiting the prototyping, for example. But then there's also some of these challenges with FDA regulations and the documentation piece, and how can we, I know that they're trying to promote the use of simulation in those different aspects as well. So keep raising the issue with the people that you're working with at CDRH and the organizations that are participating in those MDUFA conversations. I would say raise it to that level as well. Because if they only hear from us internally, then they think it's just something that we're trying to promote as scientists instead of something that the industry is really interested in wanting us to push forward. So I think when they hear from you, it gives a lot of credibility to that ask as well.
Awesome. Okay. Well, that is fantastic. And I love that you air quoted scientist too, because that's really, that's awesome. Scientist. So thank you, Tina. That was really fantastic. If anyone has additional questions for Tina, put them in the chat bot. And if you want to add your email, we can make sure to connect everyone at the end. We'll also send out the attendee list for everyone. So in case there's somebody you want to connect with after, I think that's great.
Yeah, Rachel, there is one more question in the chat bot, and then I had a follow-on just real quick. Sorry, I don't mean to bump. But so will the FDA have to certify the models as we move this thought process forward is one question.
So which models? We do have a medical device development tools pathway for qualifying models that can be used by multiple stakeholders. If you guys have models that you want to use for your individual companies, I would say reach out to me and we can get those folks on board to have a conversation about a strategy for how that can be used in your submissions. I think if there is a process for certifying models, or qualifying models is the term that we use, that can be used by stakeholders. So those are underway at this time. Medical Device Development Tools Program, I would check that out. There are 2 computational models that have already been qualified in that program.
Great. And then just one more question here. And I guess it's a
Sure.
bigger question. I don't know if you'll be able to answer it or not, but when we looked at the digital pre-cert program as a pretty forward-thinking regulatory advancement that the FDA made, but it has experienced some pushback from senators and folks asking if this kind of fundamentally changes the way the FDA is doing business, which would require congressional approval. Has anyone on the team looked at whether or not this would require an actual act of Congress to change?
So I think the short answer is yes, but I also think I give kudos to the pre-cert program and how they're thinking. We are actually trying to leverage that same approach of appraisal metrics for computational modeling. One of the challenges we face that partly is a resource issue, but is also a challenge of how much oversight do we pay to medical device companies that use these tools. If information is provided in a regulatory submission, we have to review all the details and provide our feedback. But if we can come up with some good simulation practice guidelines that say, if you're following these practices and you can demonstrate, that you've met these different metrics, then can't we take some of the burden off both FDA and industry to say we have to review every single instantiation of a model or how it's used in the product lifecycle and put some of that back on the industry? And so I think those kinds of conversations and that oversight, things will have to change. Again, those conversations those drivers have to come from you guys as well, and not just from us.
Great. Thank you so much.
Awesome.
Thanks.
Thanks, Tina. Okay, Jen, you're up. I would give me 1 second. I will share my screen with your slides. And screen. And there we go. Let me know if everyone can see them.
I can.
Awesome. Great. Jen is going to joining us from McDermott, Will, and Emery, and love to kind of hear your thoughts on the telehealth situation.
Sure thing. And I just realized I did not oversee this first slide. I'm sorry for the disgusting virus on the bottom right-hand corner. I guess our some of our helpers at McDermott are getting a little punchy, so I should have maybe put unicorns and rainbows. Let me just start by saying that I just want to express my thanks to everyone on the call who is really on the front lines of trying to respond to this. I feel a little bit like I've woken up in a horror movie, and I know that while this is stressful for everybody, it's incredibly stressful for people who are healthcare providers and who work in developing health tech. And I'm sure if other people are on the line, they would say thank you as well. So I was asked to just spend a couple minutes talking about some of the federal response to COVID-19 over the last couple of weeks. McDermott has a complimentary COVID-19 response page on its website. It has recordings of dozens of webinars, literally, that we've done in the last 3 weeks, and even more articles. They're all there for any of you to look at if they can be helpful on particular topics, and we hope that they can be useful to your companies and organizations. For today, I was asked to just touch on a select few of the changes that the federal government is experimenting with in response to COVID-19. This is somewhat of a random sample, touching in part on telehealth and remote monitoring. Just to sort of level set, telehealth is typically the use of technology to deliver a healthcare service. So the easiest example would be something like a video chat function that allows providers to see patients remotely. Remote monitoring and other forms of digital health tools are not necessarily a treatment. They could be. So you could have a remote monitoring tool that is from a distance tracking blood pressure or sleep or other types of biometric symptoms, or it could be something that really isn't a treatment service but falls into other regulatory categories like ongoing quality improvement and patient satisfaction or care coordination. So we have a range of digital health tools that are being used to support the remote delivery of care, but also being used to support the healthcare system more generally. And the federal response in some cases is specific to one or the other. So first, we wanted to start with providers and plans. Now you might be thinking, well, why is that relevant? Because most of the folks on the phone are neither providers nor health plans, but many of your technologies might be used by healthcare providers and healthcare plans, and they have some flexibility that they might not have had before. What we are hearing from our providers and plans as they think about digital health solutions is how they balance sort of short-term and long-term priorities. So what do they want to do in the immediate moment to respond to COVID-19, to support themselves, to keep their providers, for example, as healthy as possible, but also to keep their patients and plan members healthy? And how do they want to balance that with what was really already a major pivot to digital health, perhaps not as abrupt as what we are all experiencing right now, but this has been a long-term trend. So to the extent folks have technologies that have a digital component and you're talking with providers and plans about how to adopt those or how to leverage them to respond to COVID-19, be aware that a lot of these entities have or were in the process of developing digital health governance plans to sort of take stock of the technologies that are being, that they're being asked to consider implementing. They are struggling to figure out what the actual technologies do. One of the questions I got actually this morning was, every digital health and medical device company that comes to me sounds the same. I don't understand what any of them do. And I thought that was such an interesting question. This came from a very sophisticated actor in the healthcare and life sciences industry that they're just being bombarded with everyone promising that they have the most important digital health tool or the digital health tool that's going to best help an entity get through the next number of weeks or months on COVID-19. You may know your technology, your device extremely well, but you may be speaking with folks, very sophisticated folks who are struggling to make selection choices and thinking about how you want to talk about your technology or your device and how it can be implemented as part of an overall roadmap for that client is really important. I think another important thing to consider is the actual experience level of the clinical and administrative staff with these technologies. So a lot of healthcare providers and administrative staff are being handed solutions with very little time to get used to using them. And they may have relative degrees of comfort with interacting with their jobs, with their colleagues and their patients using these telehealth and remote technologies. So to the extent, and I know everyone is scrambling, as a lawyer who works with healthcare clients, I'm scrambling too, but to the extent that as part of your conversations with entities that could really benefit from your technology, you can bring some thoughts and some steps that they can use to implement them successfully. I think that would be enormously helpful. You know your technology best, and your customers really need this. And then lastly, to the extent that your technology ingests health information on your side of the firewall, thinking about how that information, when we all catch our breath, is going to or not going to be integrated into the electronic health record of the provider, into the designated record set maintained by the health plan. The data that we're capturing now amidst the exigencies of COVID-19 still remains data that is regulated within the healthcare system. And at some point, we kind of need to catch up with that data collection and make sure that it's integrated and curated in ways that the law expects. So if we can go to the next slide. Great.
Okay, just chiming in really quickly, just reminding everyone if you're unmuted to go ahead and mute so that there's no background noise. Just throwing that out there.
Great, thanks. Another important thing is to think about the patients or consumers, if you offer a consumer-facing technology, how they may interact. So historically, the degree to which individuals used digital health tools or devices was largely driven by their comfort level, really frankly a preference, or because that was really their only choice. So for example, you might have to use a digital health tool in conjunction with your management of your diabetes, or you might have gotten used to the fact that your data is tracked when you use a sleep apnea machine, because the data use is often tied, frankly, to the reimbursement under certain health programs for the apnea device itself. Now we have patients essentially being asked to interact digitally with the healthcare system in an emergency way. And so taking, again, some time as you think about implementing your technologies with new customers is how to onboard patients. Will patients see your name, for example, on the product and wonder, why is my data going to this company in Massachusetts? Tips to help patients use that technology safely. So for example, to the extent your technology includes an app on a patient's phone, that patient may have a very delayed password engagement. So maybe their phone has to be idle for 5 minutes, unlike a lawyer's iPhone, which I think is idle for about 2 seconds before the password kicks in. Perhaps part of the onboarding is to recommend to patients that they shorten the window in which their phone can be idle. You might think about how to talk about other safety features. For example, if the technology enables a patient to take a picture of something, a rash, for example, that's hurting them, reminders about deleting that picture from their phone once it's been shared with their provider. Those are just two very easy examples. But providers and plans do not right now have the luxury of re-envisioning how they're going to onboard patients to some of your technologies. And to the extent that you can participate in that process, and as well as thinking about this across generational and other socioeconomic issues. Again, we're all working very quickly, but I know from our health system and health plan clients, this is something they're also very sensitive to. So if we go to the next slide, okay, great. As you are talking with the use of your telehealth and other remote monitoring tools, these are the absolute gating questions that I think you can expect to get. And these are not new. These are all gating questions that would be true in really any digital health negotiation. But the reason we wanted to just pause on these is you may want to think about how you approach these gating questions for a sort of short-term COVID-19 informed moment versus long-term. And as we'll see, some of the actions at the federal level are only as of now in force, or the enforcement discretion, for example, is only extended during the course of the national pandemic. So you may find, regardless, that you'll want to have one negotiation for the short term and a different negotiation for the long term to get these things moving. But these are definitely the types of issues that folks remain concerned about, even under these circumstances. Okay, we can flip to the next one. Okay. So this is your world. Normally we have the slide entitled Gathering Storm of Regulators. Maybe for the only moment in my career is it going to say Easing Storm of Regulators. So these are all the agencies that typically would be regulating in any routine way telehealth and remote monitoring. And in many cases at the state and federal, they are offering relief during this declared emergency. But as underscored here, that relief is by and large temporary. That relief ranges from certain things in connection with the engagement of the conduct, of clinical trials at the FDA, and to all the way at the other end of the circle, boards of medicine that are looking at ways of expanding the providers across state lines that can engage in telehealth services. You have reimbursement for telehealth services that it's undergoing a change. For those who aren't aware of what SAMHSA is, it's the agency that enforces certain regulations to protect the privacy of alcohol and drug abuse. This is really critical during this period for two reasons, both of which are tragic. One is that we may see an uptick in addictive behavior as people confront tremendous stress. And two, because if healthcare providers are asking to deliver services remotely, behavioral health can be a particularly challenging one in some cases to deliver remotely. The last thing I would say just about this slide is that while many of these federal changes and state changes are temporary, depending on how long the national emergency continues, we're going to get used to this easing. We're going to get used to working with a provider, who works across state lines. Providers are going to get used to different reimbursement models. Industry sponsors of clinical trials are going to get used to using certain remote technologies permitted by the FDA. Healthcare institutions are going to get used to working outside of the HIPAA structure in certain cases for treatment-related purposes. How we sort of put Humpty Dumpty, back together again, and then after COVID, or maybe short-term relief from COVID, I guess, depending on the model, is something really that remains to be seen. I think what we can say is that we're never going to go back to the old normal. This is going to go along long enough, even if it's just a matter of weeks, that certain things are fundamentally going to have changed. Go to the, great. Okay, so let's just quickly start with the FDA. I'm going to go through these really fast. The FDA has issued a number of guidances. I just want to touch on the one related to clinical trials. To the extent you are currently conducting a clinical trial regulated by the FDA, you are, under certain circumstances, going to be able to use remote monitoring and other telehealth tools to assist in the conduct of that clinical trial in ways that will not require prior IRB or FDA approval, which they might otherwise have required, either because they would not have been technologies that would have been deemed appropriate, or because you won't have time to get prior deviation permission. This is not a blank check, and I should probably say that about all of these efforts. They all have lots of details, which I won't be able to go through on this call, but this is really more a list of topics. How these guidances actually relate to your business is pretty fact specific. If we just quickly go to the next one. OCR. So OCR is the Office of Civil Rights. It enforces the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act, privacy, security, and breach notification provisions. In general, entities regulated by HIPAA can only use HIPAA compliant technologies. But as healthcare providers, and this does not extend to health plans, but as healthcare providers rapidly are scaling up their digital tools to help treat their patients, they are increasingly turning to tools that are not HIPAA compliant. What this guidance says that under certain circumstances, if a covered entity uses a digital health tool that is encrypted and is non-public facing, so public facing would be something like TikTok, but a non-public facing technology, they may be able to do that and avoid OCR enforcement. The guidance includes a number of facts and circumstances that you'd have to consider. There are some open questions, and it does include an illustrative list of encrypted non-public facing technologies that would be considered publicly facing, as well as some companies out there who have signaled to OCR that they're willing to sign business associate agreements. If we go to the next one. This is just some more information on that same guidance. Okay, quickly, telehealth specifically, there are a number of changes. We just wanted to sort of highlight what they are. There have been some coverage changes in terms of the degree to which reimbursement may be available. There are some new changes with respect to when you can practice across borders. And also we have learned that COVID-19 is going to be considered a public health emergency. And this allows or relaxes otherwise certain restrictions on the writing of prescriptions. Again, very fact specific, and telehealth is not a panacea, but certainly something we'd be happy to talk to you about if you offer a telehealth solution. Continuing on just this last slide, there are a range of practice standards that are beginning to percolate through the market about how to use telehealth appropriately, specifically when a telehealth solution is an appropriate way to care for a patient. You need to think about consent, especially if the telehealth solution is not offered by the regular physician. So if you're sort of sweeping in as a tool, think about how you're going to facilitate your customers obtaining consent. And then finally, not all tele-solutions are covered by the OCR privacy guidance we were just discussing. So thinking about how to read the telehealth relaxation, so to speak, with the FDA relaxation, with the privacy relaxation is a little bit of a chessboard, but certainly something we can help you with. So I know that was right to the end, but hopefully that was fast enough, Rachel.
I'm unmuting because that was awesome. So we are coming right to the end. So I do want to let everyone who may need to jump off just say thank you, appreciate you all joining us. And we can absolutely, Jen, I don't know if you have 2 minutes to stay on in case there are any additional questions.
Sure.
Okay. But just before everyone hops off, want to make sure we let you know about some upcoming things that are happening in our world. We have a list of virtual events that is consistently being updated on massmedic.com, and that we would love to have you participate in. We're doing some work with some activities for emerging technologies and startups, as well as working to connect everyone on the phone. One of the initiatives that we're undertaking with some of the trade associations and partners in med device is putting together a list for emerging and small medical technologies to let the government know how COVID-19 has impacted them directly. We will be posting that on our website and sending it out to everyone. Please, we're trying to gather information so that we can lobby on behalf of small and emerging companies. So make sure that if you see that come through, share it with as many people as you possibly can. We're looking to gather those stories. So Brian, anything else before I say, if you have to jump off, but otherwise we'll do a couple questions?
Yeah, when is our next? We have an activity coming up very soon. What is that one?
Next week is the pitch prep session. So pitch deck prep session happy hour. So if you're interested in joining us for that, it'll be next Wednesday. We're doing a pitch deck prep session happy hour.
Great. And then I just wanted to say we took a look, and the topics that had the most interest were how to sell during this time, expanding your network, and then working with remote teams. We will start to cover those in the next on the next program that we have next week. So we're going to do this weekly, we promise you, and we will go ahead and get some more great experts here to come help us out. And please fill out, when we get that form out, fill it out. No matter what the impact is, we're going to get that pipeline straight up to our congressional representatives, and we will see what we can do to help get relief for the people who have experienced business interruption as a result of this terrible virus.
Awesome. So just want to make sure, see if there's any questions from anyone, add them to the chat, or you can probably take yourself off mute if you have any direct questions for Jen. Brian, did you have any?
No,
I know I have a ton, but I don't want to drag it on. But,
yeah. So Angus has put in the chat direct lines of communication for Jen and for Angus at MWE. We'll, like I said, what we're going to do is we'll get this recording locked down. We'll release it to you guys first, along with all the links we discussed. And then we will go ahead on our LinkedIn page and then put all the pertinent links up. But we'll make sure everybody has contact information for our speakers today.
Absolutely. Okay, great. Well, thank you, everyone. And we really appreciate you joining us. Hope you'll join us again next week.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye.
Thanks very much.
Randy, I love your chair.